The trouble began, as most of Percival Tumbleseed's adventures did, with a conversation he hadn't realized he was having. He was strolling through a meadow that seemed particularly good at pretending to be ordinary when the ground coughed. Not rumbled, not cracked, coughed, a soft, embarrassed ahem that made Percival pause mid-step. "Bless you," he said, because manners mattered, even when directed at the ground. "Thank you," said the earth. Percival blinked down at the soil. "You can talk." "Not usually," said the voice from below. "But you were walking rather politely, and I felt inclined to make your acquaintance." The umbrella, who had been using this quiet stroll as an opportunity to sunbathe, snapped shut irritably. Oh, splendid. First forests that whisper, then deserts that breathe, and now talkative topsoil, is nowhere safe from conversation. "I should hope not," said Percival cheerfully. "Conversation is civilization." "Conversation," muttered the umbrella, "is a trap for the verbose." Before Percival could reply, the ground hiccuped, and a small hole appeared before him. Perfectly circular, not ominous in the least. It smelled faintly of moss, candle smoke, and old bedtime stories. "Is this your doing?" Percival asked the earth. "Yes," it replied modestly. "I seem to have misplaced something. Down there. Would you be so kind as to fetch it?" Percival peered into the hole. It was deep, not dark, but deep, as though depth itself had decided to show off. The sides glowed with soft, phosphorescent veins, and from far below came the distant sound of murmuring, not of danger, but of community. "What exactly have you misplaced?" he asked. "My clock," said the ground. "You own a clock?" "Of course," said the earth, slightly offended. "How else would I know when to turn over my seasons?" The umbrella sighed. "Here we go again?" Percival smiled. "Well, I suppose someone ought to help. And if one's going to fall into a hole, it might as well be a polite one." He adjusted his satchel, straightened his tie, for underground first impressions mattered too, and addressed the hole. "May I?" "Please do," said the earth. "Mind the echoes. They're still learning their manners." And with that, Percival Tumbleseed stepped forward and down into the world beneath the world. The descent was unlike any he'd known. He wasn't falling so much as drifting, as though gravity had suddenly remembered it was a suggestion rather than a rule. Soft currents of light floated past him, each carrying faint shapes, fish made of mist, feathers that whispered lullabies, and once, rather alarmingly, a teacup filled with stars. The umbrella muttered something about chronically unscientific physics and stayed tightly shut. As they descended, the air changed flavor, not temperature or scent, but flavor. It tasted like wet parchment, forgotten lullabies, and the color sepia. Finally, after a descent that might have taken moments or centuries, time, it seemed, was stretching its legs. Percival's boots touched solid ground, or nearly solid. The floor beneath him was made of woven roots, smooth and springy, like the world's most organic trampoline. Above, faint lights drifted, not fireflies, but tiny lanterns held by invisible hands. "Well," said Percival softly, "it's quite cozy for a cosmic abyss." From the shadows came a small sound, a cross between a giggle and a drip. Then another. Then dozens. Shapes began to emerge, small round creatures with wide eyes and translucent bodies that shimmered with shifting colors like reflections on soap bubbles. "Ah," said Percival. "Residents." One of them approached timidly, carrying what looked like a pebble wearing a crown. "Are you the surface walker?" it squeaked. "I suppose so," said Percival. "At least I walked on the surface until quite recently." The creature beamed. "Then you're expected. The cavern said you might arrive." "The cavern said?" asked the umbrella. "Everything talks down here," whispered the creature conspiratorially. "Walls gossip, stalactites argue, puddles recite poetry if you step on them correctly." "That sounds charming," said Percival. "It's a bureaucratic nightmare," said the umbrella. The glowing creature bowed. "Welcome to the subterranean provinces of possibly important things. I'm Gleam, junior custodian of Echoes." "Echoes have custodians?" asked Percival, delighted. "Oh yes," said Gleam seriously. "Otherwise they start remembering the wrong conversations." "I see," said Percival, though he didn't. "And might you know where I could find the Earth's clock?" Gleam's glow dimmed slightly. "Ah, the clock of the world. Yes," said Percival. "It appears to have gone missing." "Oh, it's not missing," said Gleam. "Just stopped." "Stopped?" "Completely. Everything beneath the earth has been stuck between moments ever since. The stalactites haven't dripped in weeks, and the worms are starting to hold protests." The umbrella groaned. "We've stumbled into another crisis." Gleam nodded gravely. "The Council of Cavities will want to see you." They followed Gleam through tunnels that twisted like thoughts, mid-dream. The walls pulsed softly, breathing in tandem with the ground's heartbeat. Each passage opened into another, some horizontal, some vertical, some politely diagonal. At one point, they crossed a river that flowed uphill, a stream of melted moonlight that whispered encouraging words to itself. "Left here," said Gleam. "Mind the stalagmite. It's ticklish." Eventually they reached a vast chamber, filled with hanging crystals that hummed faintly. In the center stood a large table, carved entirely out of fossilized time, around which several unusual figures were gathered. A boulder wearing spectacles, a woman made entirely of dust motes and patience, and something that might once have been a shadow before taking a sabbatical. They looked up as Gleam entered. "Honored Council," said the little custodian, "the surface walker has arrived." The dust woman inclined her head. "So it is true. The world above still sends heroes." "I'm not precisely a hero," said Percival. "More of an enthusiast." The boulder cleared its throat, a sound like mountains practicing music. "You are here about the clock?" "Yes," said Percival. "I understand it stopped." "It has not merely stopped," rumbled the boulder. "It has forgotten how to tick." "That seems serious." "It is catastrophic," said the shadow, whose voice came from several directions at once. "Without the tick, time below cannot agree with time above." "We've been living in a continuous meanwhile. That sounds almost peaceful," said Percival. "It was," said the dust woman, "until cause and effect filed for separation." Percival blinked. "Oh dear." "Indeed," said the boulder. "We have consulted the drip mathematicians, the worm philosophers, and even the choir of reflective moss. All agree. Someone must descend to the chamber of the first echo, where the clock's heart still sleeps." The umbrella groaned softly. "I was afraid of that." Percival smiled. "Sounds precisely like the sort of thing I'd do." The council exchanged glances. "Then it is decided," said the dust woman. "Surface walker, you will journey into the lowest caverns, where light forgets to return. There you must find the heart of the clock and remind it how to tick." Percival bowed. "I'll do my best." Gleam clapped their small translucent hands. "Oh, this is exciting. A quest." The umbrella muttered. "Yes, and probably damp." Before he left, the council presented him with a map, or rather, something that resembled a map, but behaved like an indecisive scarf. It folded and unfolded itself, humming quietly. "It shows the way forward only when you're not looking at it," explained the dust woman. "Like all good advice," said Percival. Armed with the map, accompanied by the enthusiastic Gleam and the ever-doubtful umbrella, Percival set out deeper into the caverns beneath the clock of the world. Behind him, the council murmured in low tones. The boulder said, "Do you think he'll succeed?" The shadow shrugged. "Success is relative when time refuses to cooperate." The dust woman sighed. "At least he's polite." And far ahead, the caverns began to hum, faintly, expectantly, as if the world itself were holding its breath. The tunnels deepened, and with each slow step the air grew older. It no longer smelled of earth, but of time itself, metallic, faintly sweet, like iron left too long beneath rain. The walls seemed to breathe around Percival, a steady pulse that reminded him he was inside something vast and ancient, something still dreaming. The path sloped downward, not in a straight descent, but in a slow spiral, as though the caverns preferred to take their thoughts in circles. The umbrella, folded under Percival's arm, stayed silent now. Even it seemed cowed by the density of stillness here, a silence so absolute it pressed against the eardrums, demanding reverence. Gleam's small light moved ahead, casting a shifting corona of color upon the walls. The tiny custodian's footsteps made no sound. Even their glow seemed to tread gently. Beneath their feet, the ground turned from woven roots to polished stone. Strange patterns rippled across it, like frost spreading on the glass, except that they moved. The designs rearranged themselves subtly as Percival passed, curling into spirals and unfurling again into lines. He touched one line briefly with a gloved hand, and a faint warmth answered. The feeling of recognition without understanding. There were stories here, thousands of them, pressed layer upon layer into stone. He wondered how long the world had been writing to itself in secret. The tunnel opened suddenly into a vast chamber. At first glance, it seemed empty. Then Percival realized he was standing at the lip of a cliff, and below stretched an underground valley, vast enough to hold its own weather. Mists coiled lazily through the air. Far beneath, a river wound like a dark ribbon, its surface glassy and luminous. The glow didn't come from above, but from within the water itself, a phosphorescent gleam like bottled moonlight, and it was flowing uphill. He blinked, staring. From a distant basin, the river climbed the valley's curve against gravity, curling through arches of stone and winding back toward the higher reaches of the cavern, disappearing somewhere beyond a wall of stalactites. Its movement was slow but deliberate, as if time itself had grown confused about direction. A soft wind blew upward from the valley. It carried with it the scent of old parchment and petrichor. Percival felt it brush against his face, like memory. For a long while, he simply stood there, watching the impossible river breathe. Every few heartbeats, its color changed. First silver, then blue, then a delicate amber like honey seen through sunlight. The sound of it was faint, not the babble of water, but a low, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate somewhere inside the chest, rather than the ears. Gleam hovered beside him, their glow reflected in the river far below, as though the water were answering its smaller kin. "It remembers," Gleam said softly. "That's what the archivist told us. It only flows toward what's already happened." Percival looked down at the stream and wondered what it would be like to drink from such water. to taste the past, perhaps even to drown in it. He said nothing. Words felt fragile here. The path wound downward along the cliff's inner wall. Stairs had been carved directly into the rock, worn smooth by ages of use, though by whom he could not tell. Along the steps grew thick mats of pale moss that glowed faintly when touched, lighting the way with a melancholy gentleness. Every so often, Percival glimpsed ancient carvings beside the path, scenes of figures, half human, half geological, raising their hands toward an unseen sky. Their eyes were made of crystal that reflected any light into rainbows. Some carvings were eroded to near obliteration, their features smoothed into abstraction. Others were fresh, as though etched yesterday. By the time they reached the valley floor, the river's hum filled the air like a constant memory. It vibrated through stone and bone alike. Percival crouched beside its edge, watching light curl lazily within the water. Not reflections, but images. Faces flickered across the surface, brief, flickering moments of laughter, grief, rain on windows, doors closing. None of them lingered longer than a blink. It was not a mirror. It was a recording. The surface quivered as though breathing. When Percival reached toward it, a memory rose. His own this time. A glimpse of his cottage, the kettle whistling, a book half read beside the window. It looked impossibly far away, like another lifetime. He drew back quickly, the reflection rippling out of existence. He stood in silence, the echo of that moment ringing faintly behind his eyes. Somewhere nearby, Gleam whispered a small prayer to the river of remembered things. Their voice trembled slightly, like the shimmer of their glow. The ceiling arched far above, lost in shadow. Long stalactites hung like frozen bells, and from their tips dripped not water, but light, slow, viscous droplets that sank into the river below, thick as syrup. Each drop entered with a faint, musical note, and where it fell, the river shimmered brighter for a heartbeat. The whole cavern was a symphony of slow light and slower sound. They followed the river upstream, though upstream was hardly accurate when direction itself felt uncertain. The air grew denser the further they walked, filled with a fine floating dust that glittered faintly like falling ash. When Percival breathed it in, it tasted faintly of dreams he had almost remembered. The walls changed, too, from rough stone to smooth surfaces covered in faint writing, spiraling upward and downward in countless lines. Some letters glowed softly, others were nothing but grooves. Percival ran a hand along one and felt warmth, then a faint vibration, as if the wall were still speaking in its sleep. Gleam floated closer, tracing the symbols. "This is the archive," they said. "The cavern keeps the words people meant to say, but never did. They gather here until someone listens." Percival looked around slowly. The entire tunnel seemed to murmur under its breath, a chorus of unspoken things, all blending into a sound that was almost silence, but not quite. It felt like standing inside the sigh of the world. He thought of letters he'd never written, apologies left too long unsaid. Perhaps their echoes were here too, drifting between the stones. As they moved forward, the glow of the river deepened, its colors shifting toward indigo and gold, rippling across the cavern walls like the underside of sunlight through deep water. The sound changed as well, from hum to whisper, as though the river was aware of being watched. They passed through a narrow archway, and the tunnel widened again into another chamber, this one circular, with the river cutting directly through its center. This was no natural formation, The symmetry was too deliberate. It looked crafted, grown, perhaps, by something that understood both architecture and reverence. The basin's rim was lined with thin, upright stones, each etched with sigils that pulsed faintly. Between them hung strings of delicate mineral filaments that resonated softly, vibrating like plucked harp strings whenever the air moved. The atmosphere here was electric and hushed, as though one had entered the stillness between lightning and thunder. Gleam's light dimmed instinctively. "The hall of the archivist," they whispered. Percival didn't answer. He could feel the weight of the place pressing inward, not threateningly, but with the solemn patience of something that had been waiting a very long time to be noticed. The sphere above the river flickered faintly, and for a brief instant the light inside coalesced into a shape. A figure neither male nor female, neither solid nor spectral, but composed of pale memory. It looked directly at Percival. Then the light went out, and only the slow hum of the backward-flowing river remained. He stood there for a long while, feeling very small beneath the stone sky. This was not a place meant for surface things, not for breathing or blinking or existing in the ordinary sense. Here, the world's forgotten stories gathered like dew, and time circled back to drink from itself. Even the silence seemed older than language. When at last he turned to leave, the faintest tremor rippled through the ground, subtle but unmistakable. Far off in the darkness, something ticked. Once, then stopped. Percival looked toward the sound. The echo lingered like a heartbeat that had hesitated. The tremor passed, but its echo seemed to linger in the bones of the cavern, a faint, rhythmic beat like the ticking of a buried clock. It was a pulse too steady to be an accident, too soft to be a threat. It felt watchful. Percival stood at the river's edge, gazing up at the hollow sphere of crystal. The cracked globe swayed almost imperceptibly, as though disturbed by the tremor. Light still pooled inside it, dim and bruised, circling with the weary persistence of a tired thought. He tilted his head, listening. There it was again. Tick, pause, tick. It didn't belong to any clock he'd ever heard. Each sound felt heavy, deliberate, and faintly sad, like the heartbeat of a sleeping god. Gleam hovered beside him, their tiny radiance flickering anxiously. "He's awake," they whispered, and their voice seemed to dissolve before it reached the cavern walls. "The archivist hasn't stirred in 1,000 seasons." "Awake," Percival repeated softly, tasting the word as if it were a stone in his mouth. "From what?" Gleam only shivered, a ripple of pale light, and did not answer. The air around the sphere thickened. From its cracks spilled a faint golden vapor that drifted downward like sighs. The vapor reached the river, touched the surface, and rippled outward in concentric circles. The backward current faltered for a moment, then reversed itself completely, flowing downstream for the first time. Percival took an involuntary step backward. The world had decided to change direction again, and it did so with a quiet confidence that refused to explain itself. A voice emerged from within the sphere. It wasn't sound exactly, more the memory of having heard something once. It arrived in the air like a déjà vu of words. "Who keeps footsteps in my library?" The voice was ancient and fluid, slipping between tones, sometimes low as shifting earth, sometimes high as the chime of glass. The crystal sphere brightened, and within it the vapor condensed into a vague humanoid shape, tall, draped in a robe of moving text. Letters flowed down their form like rivers, spilling endlessly into the air, where they vanished before touching ground. Percival felt every hair on his arms stand up. He bowed slightly out of instinct. "I'm terribly sorry," he said, in that polite, nervous way one speaks to ghosts or librarians. "I didn't mean to disturb your—" He gestured vaguely at the cavern. "Your reading." The light shifted, like a head tilting. "Disturbance is merely the memory of motion," said the voice. "You have already done so. Therefore you always will." "I see," said Percival, though he didn't. "Well, I do apologize for always having done that." The faintest suggestion of amusement rippled through the air, a crackle like dust motes laughing. "You are from the surface," said the archivist. "I can smell sunlight on your words." "I suppose I did bring some with me," Percival said, glancing down at the glowing moss. "It keeps getting lost in my pockets." The archivist regarded him silently for a long moment. Then they drifted lower, the sphere of crystal descending until they hovered directly above the river basin. Gleam dipped slightly, bowing mid-air, their light dimming in respect. "You are Percival Tumbleseed," said the archivist, "traveller of the forest of whispers, the rain that fell sideways, the desert that forgot its name. You are not here by accident." Percival blinked. "Oh dear," he murmured. "I was afraid of that." The sphere pulsed once, casting gentle light through the chamber. The letters on the archivist's robe began rearranging themselves, shifting into a new pattern that glowed faintly on the cavern walls. "The heart of the great clock is below us," they said. "It keeps time for everything that breathes, oh, and much that does not. But its rhythm has faltered. There are cracks in the moments between moments. Dreams slip through. Forgotten things are beginning to wake." Percival frowned slightly. "Cracks in time," he said, as though testing the sound of the phrase. "That does sound rather serious. I imagine someone should mend them?" "Indeed," the archivist murmured. "That someone is you." Percival sighed, the sound half laugh, half resignation. "It's always me, isn't it?" "Always," Gleam said softly, glowing a little brighter. "Because you keep listening when the world whispers nonsense." He could not argue with that. The archivist gestured, and the river stirred in response. From the surface rose faint images, not reflections this time, but living memories projected in rippling light. Percival saw vast underground corridors filled with moving light, gears the size of mountains turning in silence, jeweled pendulums swinging in impossible arcs, and everywhere water flowing in reverse through channels carved into stone hearts. Then a fracture, a shudder through the vision like a pulse skipped. The gears slowed, the pendulums trembled, and from somewhere deep within the caverns came a low, drawn-out groan. "The world has forgotten to count," whispered the archivist, "and when it forgets, things uncounted begin to gather." "Uncounted things," Percival echoed. "Those which exist between heartbeats," the archivist said, "between thought and dream. They feed on neglect, as if on cue a shadow passed across the basin, something shapeless and silent, rippling just beneath the water's surface. It moved like oil in reverse, slipping against the current." Percival knelt, peering closer. "And what exactly happens," he asked carefully, "if the clock stops altogether?" The archivist's light dimmed. "Then even forgetting will forget itself." For a long time, there was only the sound of the river, flowing in the wrong direction again. The archivist extended one long, translucent hand. From their palm spilled a ribbon of text, words written in a language Percival recognized only as possibility. The ribbon coiled in the air like smoke and solidified into a delicate key made of crystal and light. "Take this," the archivist said. "It will open the vault of hollow seconds. Beneath that vault, the heart of the clock sleeps. If you can find its rhythm again, the world may remember itself." Percival accepted the key with great care, feeling its faint warmth against his skin. It pulsed once, a heartbeat that was not his. "Any advice on finding the vault?" he asked, slipping the key into his coat. "It sounds rather elusive." "Follow the echoes that arrive before the sound," said the archivist. "They lead downward." "They always do." "Of course," Percival said. "Backwards echoes, uphill rivers, clocks that breathe. Perfectly sensible." The archivist regarded him with an expression that was neither approval nor pity, merely the calm awareness of stone that has seen too many suns. "Take care," they murmured. "The deeper you go, the less language will mean what it once did. Words forget their shapes down there." "I'll try not to," Percival said. "Forget? Yes. Or mean anything." The sphere began to ascend again, the light within dimming to the color of old parchment. As it rose, the backward-flowing river resumed its upward course, and the tremor of the ticking faded once more into silence. Gleam exhaled, though whether from relief or awe it was hard to tell. "That was kinder than I expected," they said quietly. "I should hope so," Percival murmured, adjusting his hat. "It's always unpleasant when librarians are cross." He turned toward the narrow tunnel leading deeper beneath the chamber. The path shimmered faintly, illuminated by the moss that grew in lines like veins. The air was thicker here, warmer, faintly humming with that same distant rhythm. He looked back once. The archivist hung motionless in the crystal sphere, like an idea preserved in amber. For just an instant, the figure's robe shifted, and Percival thought he saw his own name written there, before the letters melted back into abstraction. Then he descended into the tunnel. The deeper he went, the more the world seemed to unspool. The walls softened into curves, then into half-formed shapes that reminded him of bones or coral or the inside of a thought. His footsteps echoed oddly. Not behind him, but ahead, as if someone invisible were walking in time with his future. Gleam kept close, their glow reflecting in countless droplets that clung to the walls like stars trapped in dew. At one bend, the path opened into a smaller chamber, where the walls were covered entirely in glassy surfaces, not mirrors but frozen images of the river's memories. Each pane showed a scene: a child releasing a balloon, a door closing on a rainy day, a cup breaking in slow motion. The images moved, just barely, like living photographs caught in perpetual almost. Percival touched one, a picture of himself standing in a forest long ago, umbrella raised against impossible weather. The moment he did, the image breathed. The rain in it began to fall upward, and the figure inside smiled faintly before fading into mist. He withdrew his hand quickly. "It seems the past doesn't like being handled," he murmured. "Neither do most things," Gleam said softly. They moved on until the tunnel split into three. Each branch whispered faintly, but only one of them echoed before Percival took a step. "Backward echoes," he said thoughtfully. "The very best kind." He followed that one. The air grew cooler and quieter still. The light from Gleam dimmed, as though swallowed by depth. Soon the only sound was the faint drip of unseen water and the muffled thud of his own heartbeat. It was not unpleasant. It was simply infinite. When the path finally levelled out, Percival found himself standing on a ledge overlooking yet another abyss. But this one pulsed with faint light from below. It was not the steady luminescence of crystal veins this time, but a slow, rhythmic pulse, like breath, like something vast sleeping. "The heart of the clock," Gleam whispered. Percival exhaled, the sound catching faintly in the quiet air. "Well," he said softly, "it's always in the last place you look." The descent began not with steps, but with surrender. The ledge beneath Percival's boots shivered once, politely, like a curtain being drawn. And then it wasn't there at all. He did not fall, precisely. Falling implied direction. This was more of a gentle unmooring, as though the air itself had decided he ought to drift for a while. The cave walls glided past in slow motion, dimly luminous, their surfaces rippling with pockets of golden dust that swirled like galaxies. He thought of clouds seen from below, of curtains of light in deep water, of music you could almost touch. The sensation was not unpleasant, only confusing, which in Percival's experience was quite close to comfort. Gleam floated beside him, their glow pulsing in time with the soft heartbeat that filled the hollow below. "The vault doesn't like stairs," they said quietly. "It prefers remembering how to fall." "How courteous of it," Percival murmured, "though I do wish it remembered where to stop." As if in answer, the motion slowed. The air thickened, turning syrupy. The faint hum around them deepened until it was less a sound than a presence, vibrating gently through their bones. Then, with the slow inevitability of honey reaching the bottom of a jar, they touched ground. They stood in a vast chamber that was less a cave than an enormous lung carved from obsidian. The walls were glossy and dark, breathing with faint light from within, each inhale and exhale shifting the patterns etched across their surfaces. Every inch of stone was engraved with numbers, countless, cascading digits arranged in spirals and fractals, each glowing faintly before fading. But there were gaps. These were the hollow seconds. Percival approached one such gap. It was no larger than a teacup's mouth, but when he peered into it, depth unfolded, infinite, liquid, filled with distant echoes of ticking that had lost their clocks. He felt his reflection slide sideways in the surface, as though the hollow second had decided to remember a different version of him. He saw that reflection blink, a moment too late. "Careful," Gleam said. Their glow dimmed. "Empty time is hungry." "I suppose it would be," Percival murmured. "So much waiting on an empty stomach." He stepped back. The gap sighed softly and closed. At the chamber's center lay a great pendulum. It hung not from the ceiling, which was lost far above in darkness, but from nothing at all. It simply existed, suspended mid-air, a massive weight of translucent stone that pulsed faintly with golden light. The pendulum's movement was slow, too slow, and each swing left a smear of afterglow hanging in the air as though time were reluctant to move on. Beneath it, set into the floor, was an immense dial divided into 12 uneven arcs. Each was carved with scenes that looked like fragments of dreams, a tree losing its shadow, a river curling into the sky, a clock melting into an egg. The pendulum's light moved across these pictures like a lazy sun, illuminating each for a heartbeat before slipping away. "The heart of the clock," whispered Gleam. "Or what's left of it." Percival approached, boots crunching softly on a layer of glittering dust. "Looks rather unwell," he said. "Has it caught a case of hesitation?" Gleam tilted in the air. It's lost its seconds. They wandered off through the cracks. Percival frowned gently, as though scolding a concept. Seconds shouldn't wander. It's terribly bad for scheduling. They forget, Gleam said. When the world above stopped counting properly, the moments here grew hollow. Some tried to become minutes. Others simply faded. Percival crouched at the edge of the dial. He could feel the hum of the pendulum deep in his ribs, an irregular throb, like a tired heart. He reached into his coat pocket and touched the crystal key the archivist had given him. It pulsed once in recognition. The vault began to respond. At first, the change was subtle, a faint shift in the tone of the air, a deepening of the heartbeat rhythm. Then the carvings on the floor started to move, their dreamlike scenes coming alive in slow motion. He watched as the tree grew its shadow back, only to lose it again. The river climbed upward and fell in reverse. The melting clock reformed, cracked, and melted again. Time was looping, but imperfectly. It was trying to remember how to behave. Gleam fluttered closer, whispering something in a language that wasn't sound. The light in their body spread outward, tracing delicate threads across the air, lines of connection between the hollow seconds in the walls and the pendulum's rhythm. The vault sighed. A faint tremor passed through the floor. Dust drifted upward like snow. "Something's waking," Gleam murmured. "Hopefully not hungry," Percival said softly. From beneath the dial came a new sound, not the steady pulse of the pendulum, but a slow scraping, like stones turning in sleep. A crack opened at the center of the dial, releasing a thin beam of light that shot upward, striking the pendulum. The pendulum flared briefly, and when the light receded, a voice began to speak. It was quieter than the archivist's, frailer, fragmented, as though coming from somewhere both far away and very close inside one's head. "Who wins the hands? When all hands are gone?" Percival swallowed. "A fair question," he said, "though I was hoping for a less existential riddle." The light pulsed again. "Time is a garden," said the voice. "It withers without attention. You with the umbrella of improbable weather. You have stepped upon its roots." Percival blinked. "Ah," he said. "That explains the squelching noise." Gleam bowed low, their glow flickering reverently. "The clock speaks," they whispered. "I rather wish it wouldn't," Percival murmured. "Every time something does, I end up volunteering for something heroic." The pendulum's light swelled until the chamber was filled with molten gold. In the brightness, the air shimmered with floating motes, tiny spheres of faint blue light. They moved slowly, drifting aimlessly, their paths uncertain. "The hollow seconds," Gleam breathed. "They're coming home." Percival watched as they floated toward the pendulum, each tiny sphere leaving a faint trail of memory behind. Glimpses of laughter, footsteps, the scent of rain, the blink of an eye. Every one of them carried a moment the world had forgotten. He held out his hand as one passed close. It paused, hovering over his palm. Inside, it flickered the image of a cup of tea cooling beside a book. His tea from that morning. The steam reversed itself, and the cup filled back to the brim. Then it drifted away, vanishing into the pendulum's glow. He felt lighter, somehow, as though a piece of him had been accounted for. The pendulum began to swing faster. Its rhythm grew confident, then steady. The gaps in the walls, the hollow seconds, started to seal, numbers reappearing like returning stars. The vault exhaled, the heartbeat grew clear, and for the first time since he'd entered the caves, the silence felt content. Yet something remained wrong. The pendulum's glow faltered once, briefly, a stutter like doubt. Then a shadow spread through the chamber, creeping across the dial. From the crack beneath the pendulum, something moved. It was not the smooth emergence of a mechanism or a spirit, but a pouring. Darkness flowed upward, slow and deliberate, taking shape as it rose. It coalesced into a form that might once have been human, if humanity could forget its edges. Its face was a blur, its body composed of unlit seconds, the leftovers that had refused to return. "The uncounted," Gleam whispered, trembling. The figure turned its featureless head toward Percival. Its voice was the sound of clocks exhaling. "You restore what should be lost," it said. "You wound the silence." "You make remembering hurt," Percival straightened his hat. "Well, someone must keep the universe punctual." The uncounted took a step forward, and the air grew heavy. Around it, seconds flickered and went dark. "Time forgets for a reason," it hissed. "Without forgetting, there is no mercy." Percival felt the truth in that. But he also saw Gleam dimming beside him, their light flickering weakly under the pressure of the shadow. He took the crystal key from his pocket. It shone faintly, trembling as if afraid. "Perhaps," he said quietly, "but mercy also forgets without time." Then, before doubt could speak, he thrust the key into the crack beneath the pendulum. Light burst outward, not in beams or waves, but as a bloom. It filled the air like a thought finally remembered. The shadow screamed, though the sound came out backward, unraveling into silence. The pendulum flared once, twice, and then stilled, perfectly centered. Its glow steadied to a golden calm. The shadow dissolved into motes of dust that drifted upward, joining the ceiling like new constellations. The heartbeat continued, unbroken now, strong and even. Percival stood very still, breathing softly in the aftermath. The air smelled faintly of ozone and nostalgia. "It's done," Gleam whispered. "For now," Percival said. "Time has a dreadful habit of misplacing itself again." He looked up. The walls no longer shimmered with missing digits. Every number glowed in sequence, precise and complete. The vault was whole. And yet, in one small corner of the dial, a single space remained blank. A gentle imperfection, as if the world had decided to keep 1 second for itself. "Perhaps it deserves that," he murmured. When they finally began to ascend again, the air lifting them gently upward as it had once lowered them, Percival looked down one last time at the heart of the world. The pendulum swung steadily. The hollow seconds glowed like embers in the dark. The shadow was gone, though something of it lingered in the silence. Not menace, but memory. He tipped his hat toward it in farewell. "Good night, second chances," he whispered, and the cavern, breathing softly, seemed to answer. When Percival and Gleam rose from the vault, it was not back toward daylight, but into another kind of dark, a thinner, thinking darkness, pale with phosphorescence. The air changed texture here. It had a strange elasticity, like breathing inside a memory. The passage opened into a cathedral of stone arches, so vast they might have been rib bones of the world itself. The ground was smoother than any natural cave floor, carved into a gentle spiral that led inward, as though time itself were curling up for sleep. Gleam hovered beside him, their glow steady again. "The vault repaired its pulse," they whispered, "but not its dream." "The dream still wanders." Percival adjusted his hat, peering at the impossible ceiling. "A dreaming clock," he said softly. "Imagine what it must think of when it sleeps. The air answered him with silence, but not an empty one. It was the kind of silence that listens back. They began to walk. Each step echoed faintly, yet every echo came back altered, slightly ahead or behind, as if some version of Percival was walking faster, and another slower. He tried to ignore the sensation that there were several of him, all half a step apart, arguing politely about which of them was real. The path bent inward, spiraling closer to a central pillar of light that rose from the floor to the unseen ceiling. It looked almost liquid, a column of gold threaded with blue, rippling gently as though stirred by invisible wind. Beneath it lay what could only be described as an island, though it was surrounded not by water, but by reflections. The floor there mirrored the sky so perfectly that it was impossible to tell which way was up. And upon that island stood a single structure, a clock. But no ordinary clock. It had no face, no hands, no numbers. Its body was a lattice of stone and light, like coral and moonbeams entwined. The entire thing breathed like a sleeping creature. This was the dreaming clock, the memory of time before it learned to measure itself. Percival approached slowly. The air around it shimmered with heatless mirages, not of water, but of possibilities. He saw versions of himself that never existed, one still wandering the forest, one lost among dunes, one sitting quietly in a house that had never been built. They were all slightly transparent, flickering like candlelight on water. Gleam hovered closer to the clock, dimming to a reverent hush. "This is where the seconds are born," they said, "not counted, not captured, only imagined. The world dreams them here, one by one, before deciding which to keep." Percival frowned thoughtfully. "Then what happens to the ones it doesn't keep?" Gleam's glow quivered. "They fade, or find other work. Some become echoes, some become luck, some just wander." Percival reached toward the surface of the clock and stopped. The closer he drew, the more the air trembled with delicate resistance, as though the dream itself were shy. His fingers brushed it gently. The sensation was indescribable, warm, fluid, and vast, like touching the thought of a sunrise. Beneath his fingertips, he could feel stories, unformed and infinite, waiting to happen. Then the dream moved. The clock's surface rippled outward, spilling light that spread across the mirrored ground. The reflections deepened, became pools. Inside them, shapes began to form. Not solid things, but impressions. Each pool showed a version of time that had never quite taken root. Percival knelt beside one and saw an entire history unfold in miniature. A city that had dreamed itself into being for 3 days before deciding it wasn't ready, its towers sighing as they turned back into sand. In another pool, he saw a single second that had stretched itself too long, yearning to become an hour. When it failed, it folded into silence, content to be remembered by no one. "This place," he whispered, "is beautiful." "It's not meant to be seen," Gleam replied softly. "When something begins to notice its own dream, it risks waking up." A tremor passed through the cavern, gentle at first, then rhythmic. The pools quivered. Droplets fell from the frozen ceiling for the first time, splashing softly against the mirrored floor. Each droplet that fell turned instantly into a new reflection, a fragment of another possibility. The dreaming clock's light grew stronger, more erratic. "Something's wrong," Gleam said. "The dream is overfilling itself. It's trying to remember too much." Percival stepped back. "I've seen that happen to libraries." The light continued to swell, pulsing like breath too deep for lungs. Images from the pools rose into the air, projected as living visions, forests looping into deserts, oceans folding into themselves, stars falling upward. The entire cavern became a mosaic of unrealities. And at the center of it all, the clock began to open. The lattice of its body unfolded like a flower of glass. Within, there was not machinery, but motion, a slow whirl of sand, stars, and music too quiet to be heard. From that spinning core, something began to take shape. A figure, human-like, built of luminous dust and unfinished thoughts. It was both young and ancient, its face an ever-changing composite of everyone who had ever waited for something. When it spoke, its voice echoed as many, male, female, child, elder, all overlapping gently. "Who walks the dream of time?" Percival hesitated. "Merely a traveller," he said, "and his glowing acquaintance." The being tilted its head, eyes like eclipses. "The traveller carries moments not his own." Percival blinked. "Ah, I do seem to collect those." The being regarded him silently for a long time. "The seconds you restored have remembered their paths. But memory breeds gravity. The dream grows heavy. It must unmake to survive, gleam dimmed in alarm." "Unmake?" The figure spread its hands. "Every kept moment must be balanced by one forgotten. Otherwise, the dream collapses beneath its own remembering." Percival exhaled slowly. The pools at his feet shimmered with reflections of lives unlived. "So," he said quietly, "something must be lost." The being nodded. "Something willingly. A fragment of your story, perhaps. A moment that anchors you too tightly." He thought about that, and felt the faint pulse of all his journeys behind him. The talking mushrooms, the raining forest, the shimmering dunes. He remembered laughter that had no source, and the soft hum of a pendulum finding peace. He realized he could part with one thing. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the smallest object he carried, a button. Dull, unremarkable. Yet he remembered suddenly where it came from, the first coat he had ever worn, the one he'd left behind when he'd begun his wanderings. "This will do," he said softly. "A beginning forgotten, for a dream to continue." He placed it on the mirrored ground. The button melted like ice, dissolving into ripples of light that spread outward. The pools calmed. The trembling ceased. The dreaming clock's glow steadied, turning cool and serene. The figure watched, then inclined its head in gratitude. The dream endures. The seconds breathe again, and with that, it dissolved back into starlight. The silence that followed was unlike any Percival had ever known. It wasn't empty. It was full of rest. The pools stilled, holding only reflections of distant stars now. The ceiling's droplets refroze, mid-air once more. The spiral floor hummed faintly beneath their feet, a rhythm too slow to notice, but undeniably alive. Gleam floated closer, their light soft as candle glow. "You gave away your first beginning," they whispered. Percival smiled faintly. "Beginnings are terribly fond of returning. I suspect it'll find me again one day, disguised as something else." They stood together a while longer, listening to the quiet. Somewhere deep in the stone, the world exhaled, and time, just for a moment, seemed to nap contentedly. Then they turned toward the spiral path leading outward, where the walls shimmered with hints of dawn, though dawn had never visited this place. And as they walked, Percival found himself humming an old tune, familiar and new, as though the world itself had begun to remember the melody of its own dreaming. The path led downward again, spiraling away from the calm pulse of the dreaming clock. The stone softened as they walked, becoming porous, warm to the touch, and faintly resonant, as though the rock itself were hollow, filled with slow breathing. The air changed, too. It carried a scent that was neither damp nor dry, something clean and ancient, like the memory of rain in a place that had never seen it. Gleam floated ahead, their glow faint but steady, like a lantern made of thought. "There's movement," they whispered. "Listen." Percival stopped. The silence here was heavier, but beneath it, barely audible, he heard it. A sighing, rhythmic sound, distant and vast, waves, but that was impossible. They were miles beneath the surface, deep in a labyrinth of stone, and yet, as they turned the next bend, the passage opened into an expanse so wide it seemed to fold space itself. A subterranean sea, dark as spilled ink, stretching into eternity. The ceiling hung far above, glittering with phosphorescent lichen that mimicked stars. The light trembled upon the black waters, painting a false night that looked almost truer than the one above ground. The shoreline was made of sand that shimmered faintly, each grain a different shade of memory. Silver, violet, pale gold. When Percival knelt and touched it, the grains rearranged themselves, spelling briefly the word "remember" before scattering again in embarrassment. He exhaled softly. Even the beach is nostalgic. Gleam hovered over the surface of the water, ripples forming beneath their glow. "This is the sea beneath the stone," they said. "It gathers what the world forgets to bury. Songs, thoughts, unfinished hours." Percival peered out across the water. It was perfectly still, though somewhere deep within it he could sense movement, slow, deliberate, the turning of something vast. He squinted. "Do seas dream?" Gleam's voice dimmed. "This one remembers. It keeps what time discards." That's close enough. They found a small boat waiting for them, if boat was the right word. It was shaped like a crescent moon carved from driftwood, but the wood was translucent, threaded with veins of faint light. A single oar lay across its center, though it looked entirely unnecessary. The boat was tethered to a post made of crystal, and on that post was engraved a small, neat phrase: "Do not ask where you are going." The answer dislikes being repeated. Percival read it aloud, nodded once, and untied the rope. Sound advice, really. They stepped in. The boat dipped, sighed, then began to move of its own accord, gliding smoothly over the glassy surface without a sound. No wind, no current, only movement that felt like thought finding its way. For a while, they drifted in silence. The stars on the ceiling shimmered faintly, reflected in the dark water so perfectly that it seemed they were floating through space itself. Percival leaned back, letting the cool air brush his face. It smelled faintly of salt and petrichor, a contradiction he found quite soothing. Far below, something enormous shifted, a silhouette of impossible shape, neither fish nor shadow nor memory. It moved with slow elegance, creating ripples that never reached the surface. Gleam watched it, their glow flickering nervously. "Those are the old currents," they said, "remnants of tides that once carried days across the world before clocks were invented." Percival smiled faintly. And here I was thinking I'd seen all the unreasonable phenomena this cave had to offer. The sea hummed beneath them, low and resonant, like the distant sound of whales made of stone. The sound vibrated in the bones, not the ears. As they drifted farther from shore, the stars above began to change. They dimmed, then rearranged, forming constellations that flickered and vanished like half-forgotten dreams. In their place came images, scenes rising faintly against the ceiling, a child's laughter turned to mist, a clock melting into a puddle of silver, a forest blooming upside down. Each image lingered for a moment before dissolving into another. "The sea is remembering aloud," Gleam whispered. "Every forgotten thing ripples back, once in a great while." Percival nodded absently. His reflection in the water looked older somehow, or perhaps younger. It was difficult to tell. His eyes shimmered faintly, mirroring the impossible constellations above. He felt the strange sensation of being remembered by the world itself, as though the sea were paging through its archives and briefly recalling him. The boat slowed. Ahead, a shape rose from the dark, a small island, no larger than a cottage. Its surface was glass smooth, like obsidian polished by centuries of thought. In its center stood a single object, a door, freestanding, unattached to any wall, its frame covered in moss that glowed with a soft bioluminescence. The door was slightly ajar, and from the crack spilled faint light, like dawn translated into liquid. The boat came to rest beside the island. Gleam hovered uncertainly. Doors in the middle of seas seldom open to sensible places. Percival smiled faintly. "Fortunately, I'm not a sensible man." He stepped onto the island. The ground hummed beneath his boots, a vibration that wasn't sound, but the memory of sound. He placed his hand on the door and pushed gently. It opened without resistance. Inside was not another chamber, but an open sky. A vast, inverted world spread out beneath him, clouds drifting below his feet, rivers flowing upward into mountains that hung from the ceiling like stalactites. The stars here were reversed, too, their light pooling on the underside of the horizon. It was not a place exactly, but an idea of one, a reflection of the world above, seen through the mirror of the forgotten. And in the distance, far across that impossible sky, he could see faintly the outline of himself. Another Percival, walking through a forest made of glass leaves, his umbrella catching phantom rain. He realized with a kind of gentle understanding that every world he had wandered, forest, desert, cave, might simply be reflections of this same dreaming route. Each adventure an echo of the same question whispered differently. What does the world dream of when no one is watching? He closed the door softly. The island sighed, and the sea stirred, once, twice, before stilling again. When he returned to the boat, Gleam was waiting, their glow steady once more. "Well?" they asked. Percival looked out over the black expanse. "It's an awfully large place, this dream. I suspect we've only wandered through a fraction of its imagination." Gleam tilted, thoughtful. "Then where next?" Percival smiled faintly. "Wherever the sea forgets to stop." And with that, the boat began to move again, slowly, quietly, toward the horizon that shimmered with a light too patient to be sunrise. They drifted for what could have been minutes or centuries. The stars shifted again, arranging themselves into a slow spiral that resembled an open eye. The sea beneath them pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat hidden under layers of memory. Percival closed his eyes and let the rhythm carry him. He did not know if he was going deeper or rising upward, and it no longer mattered. For in the sea beneath the stone, direction was merely a polite suggestion, and time was content to hum to itself while the travelers dreamed. The boat's motion slowed again, though there was no shore in sight. Instead, the air itself began to thicken, the sea's surface hardening beneath them, turning translucent, then crystalline. The ore dissolved into sparks. The hull creaked once, politely, then folded into the floor as if relieved to retire from service. Percival stepped carefully onto the new surface. It shimmered faintly, like glass made from frozen breath. Beneath it, the sea still moved. Slow, pulsing waves trapped in transparency, their crests whispering fragments of half-remembered songs. The horizon brightened with a faint glow, neither sunrise nor firelight. It pulsed rhythmically, as though inviting them nearer. Gleam hovered close, their light flickering in response. "The current has led us to the library," they murmured. "This is where echoes come to rest." Percival raised an eyebrow. Libraries again. I must have a face librarians trust. And together they walked toward the light. The world unfolded gradually. The crystal floor sloped upward into arches, pillars and walkways that grew out of the sea like coral. Architecture built from stillness. Each pillar was hollow, filled with shimmering ribbons of sound, frozen mid-vibration. When Percival leaned close, he could feel whispers brushing against his mind, sentences that had once been spoken and then lost. Some were as small as sighs, others were entire speeches, unmoored from their owners. They passed beneath a vast dome that resonated faintly with every footstep, as though greeting them with a polite murmur. And there, suspended in the air, were books, thousands of them. They hung like jellyfish, their pages translucent and glowing faintly. Each turned slowly on unseen currents. But instead of ink, their words were sounds, small, trembling vibrations, visible as faint ripples of light. It was a library that had never heard itself. Percival paused beneath one of the floating tomes. It was bound in a thin membrane that shimmered between blue and silver, and it emitted a faint hum, a single note, soft and lonely. He reached up. The book drifted lower, opening itself with the delicacy of a sigh. Within its pages, light swirled, forming a brief image. A woman sitting beside an unlit candle, whispering a name into the dark. The moment lingered for a breath, then faded. "A forgotten voice," Gleam said quietly. "Every sound ever lost to silence ends up here. The library keeps them until they learn to fade properly." Percival closed the book gently. "A kind of hospice for echoes, then?" Gleam nodded, though their glow dimmed slightly, as though the thought pained them. As they walked deeper, the shelves grew taller, their heights vanishing into the luminous ceiling. Between them drifted shapes, not quite people, not quite sound. They moved slowly, translucent as heat haze, tending to the floating tomes. Each carried a quill made of glass, though none wrote with it. They merely dipped it into the air now and then, as if recording the silence itself. One of them paused as Percival passed. Its face was featureless, but it bowed politely, a gesture as old as speech. "Good evening," Percival said. The figure tilted its head. Its voice, when it came, was soft as a remembered lullaby. "Good, or not, is an opinion we no longer house." Then it drifted away again, trailing the faint scent of paper and dust. Percival looked at Gleam. Polite, if a touch nihilistic. Gleam managed a dim smile. "They are echoes that forgot what they were echoing." Eventually, they reached the library's heart, a circular atrium where the floor was water instead of crystal. The water was perfectly still, and upon its surface floated a single, enormous tome. Its cover was made of mirror, and its spine pulsed faintly with golden light. Around it hovered dozens of the silent attendants, motionless, as though waiting for the book to breathe. Percival approached slowly. The air here hummed in his bones. Gleam whispered, "That is the Atlas of lost sound." It holds every voice ever unspoken, the words swallowed, the cries never heard, the laughter no one shared. It grows heavier with every forgotten moment Percival stared at the shimmering tome. Its surface reflected his face, and behind him, faintly, 1,000 others. All possible versions of himself, all caught mid-expression, all waiting to speak. The weight of that silence pressed against him. It wasn't sad, exactly, just vast. He reached out, and the mirror rippled under his touch. A voice rose. Not from the book, but from the air itself. It was deep, gentle, and oddly familiar. "You have walked far from the measure of clocks, traveller. Do you seek to speak what was never said?" Percival hesitated. "I only seem to wander into places that ask questions." "Then wander well. Here, all sound becomes memory, and memory becomes shape. You may give something to the silence, if you wish." Gleam brightened nervously. "Be careful. Once a voice is given here, it belongs to the quiet," Percival considered. The still air around him seemed to lean closer. He thought of all the words he'd spoken to himself over the years. To the rain, the wind, the endless roads. Finally, he said softly, "Very well. I'll give it something small." He leaned close to the water and whispered a phrase. Simple, honest, and almost invisible. "Thank you." The water rippled outward, gentle as a breath. The attendants stirred. The Atlas of lost sound glowed faintly, then dimmed as though acknowledging his offering. All around, the floating books shifted, pages fluttering, hums deepening. A faint chorus rose, soft and shapeless, yet undeniably beautiful. It wasn't a song, precisely. It was the sound of gratitude returning through infinite filters of memory. Gleam hovered near his shoulder, their glow golden now. "You reminded them what kindness sounds like," they murmured. Percival smiled faintly. "It's a nice thing to forget, now and then. Gives it room to be rediscovered." They stood together, listening as the music faded back into stillness. When they turned to leave, the shelves seemed to lean slightly closer, not menacingly, but fondly, like trees bending toward sunlight. The attendants bowed once more as they passed. As they stepped back onto the crystalline floor, the sound of their footsteps echoed differently, clearer now, less lonely. And when they looked back one last time, the library shimmered faintly, as though exhaling. "Do you think it dreams?" Percival asked. Gleam nodded. "Of the last sound it hasn't heard yet." Percival adjusted his hat, his reflection flickering in the glass. "Then let's not wake it." They continued on, following a corridor of crystal that began to slope gently upward, toward a faint glimmer of movement, a light that pulsed with a rhythm too organic to be mechanical. The sound that guided them now was not an echo, but something entirely new. A heartbeat. The corridor narrowed into something that was neither tunnel nor passage, but throat. It breathed softly, the walls expanding and contracting in patient rhythm. They were made not of stone or crystal, but of something halfway between mineral and muscle. Smooth as glass, warm as living skin. Gleam drifted ahead, their light dimmed to a respectful shimmer. "We are entering the pulse chamber," they whispered. "Few reach this deep. The caverns here are old enough to remember before the surface was born." Percival ran his hand along the wall. It trembled slightly beneath his touch, as though listening. "I've read books younger than this rock," he murmured, "and they were already wiser than me." The air smelled faintly of earth and electricity. With every step, the pulse grew louder, not a sound exactly, but a vibration that found its way into bones and breath. He realized with a kind of reverent unease that the cave was alive. As they descended, the walls began to glow faintly, veins of gold and indigo branching through the stone like bioluminescent rivers. The light was rhythmic, matching the heartbeat. Soon they reached a vast chamber, round and impossibly tall. The ceiling arched into shadow, but far above, slow ripples of light drifted like the reflections of the unseen oceans. At the chamber's center was a lake, black and perfect, with a single beam of pale light falling upon it from somewhere far above. The light was steady, yet when it touched the water, it pulsed, creating concentric circles that shimmered in tune with the cave's breathing. "This," Gleam said, "is the heart of the world." Percival tilted his head. "I expected it to look more like a heart, less like a contemplative lake." Gleam smiled faintly. "Hearts are only shaped that way when they have to fit in bodies. The world's heart can take its time." He approached the lake's edge. The surface reflected not just his face, but fragments of sky, branches, storms, and seasons. Scenes layered over one another like dreams, interrupting each other's sleep. It was a mirror of everything that had ever touched the earth, caught here in a single pulse. "Does it remember us?" he asked quietly. "It remembers everything," Gleam replied, "even the things that haven't happened yet." Percival crouched, touching the water with a cautious fingertip. The ripples that spread outward shimmered in impossible colors, blues that tasted of salt, yellows that smelled of rain. Each wave carried the faintest whisper, like the beginning of words never spoken. He closed his eyes and felt the pulse beneath him align with his own heartbeat. For a moment, he wasn't sure which belonged to whom. Then the surface of the lake began to rise, not with waves, but in shapes. From its dark skin, slow forms emerged, tall, narrow silhouettes made of light and water, neither solid nor vapor. They flickered between existence and suggestion, like memory caught between waking and dream. Each one held a small orb of light at its center, pulsing, resonating, echoing the larger rhythm of the chamber. They did not move toward Percival, but around him, tracing a slow spiral, as if measuring the space his thoughts took up. He felt neither fear nor surprise, only the strange calm one feels when finally being understood by something that doesn't need words. Gleam hovered closer, their voice a low hum. "These are the keepers. They are the ones who remember the remembering." "That sounds exhausting," Percival said. "It is. That's why they rest, standing up." The keepers' forms rippled, and one of them, taller than the others, its light tinted faintly green, extended a hand. It did not touch him, but where its gesture pointed, the air quivered. From the lake rose a single platform of stone, carved not by tools but by attention. Symbols moved across its surface, shapes that rearranged themselves whenever he tried to read them. At its center was a single chair, carved from obsidian, waiting. "Am I meant to sit?" Percival asked. "Yes," said Gleam. "The heart wishes to listen." He raised an eyebrow. "Usually, hearts prefer talking." "Not this one. It already knows how the story goes. It just wants to hear your version." Percival sat. The stone was cold at first, but quickly warmed. Or perhaps he cooled, it was hard to tell. A silence fell, vast and clean. Then came the pulse again, stronger now, echoing not only in the chamber but inside his chest, synchronizing with his breathing, with the movement of thought itself. The keepers began to hum, a low, resonant tone that filled the air like incense. The surface of the lake glowed softly, and suddenly, or perhaps slowly, he saw it. The cave began to unfold into scenes, not visions exactly, but impressions. A child drawing spirals in wet sand, a fox sleeping in a hollow tree, the long, rhythmic swing of waves against a forgotten pier, an apple left to rot beside a half-finished letter, the echo of laughter that had no source. They came and went like the turning of pages, and in each one, somewhere small and subtle, was a figure with a walking stick and a curious expression. Himself, though not exactly. He was seeing his own footprints long after he had left them. The realization made him dizzy. "I think I'm being catalogued," he murmured. Gleam nodded solemnly. "The heart archives all who pass beneath the sky. You are becoming part of the rhythm, a note in the breathing of the world. I hope I'm in tune." Gleam smiled faintly. "You're more of a syncopation, really." The keeper's humming deepened, and the walls of the chamber began to vibrate. Fractures of light crawled upward, like veins of molten glass. The sound of the heartbeat filled everything, a rhythm so vast it was no longer sound at all, but the absence of anything else. Percival's thoughts blurred. He felt weightless, untethered. The lake beneath him turned transparent, revealing vast caverns below, rivers of glowing magma, skeletons of ancient mountains, forgotten cities built from the dreams of stone, and beyond them all, a single, endless light. He felt it reach for him, not with hands, but with understanding. And for an instant, he understood everything too, not as knowledge, but as belonging. The mountains were breathing, the rivers were remembering, and the world itself was listening, through him, around him, as him. It wasn't revelation or enlightenment. It was simply the comforting absurdity of realizing that even nonsense had a pulse. He laughed quietly, and the sound rang like a bell across the chamber. The keepers paused, tilting their heads as though surprised by the novelty of laughter. Then, one by one, they began to echo it, a shimmering chorus of mirth resonating through rock and water alike. For the first time in its ageless rhythm, the heart of the world laughed back. When the echoes faded, the lake's glow softened. The keepers bowed, their forms dissolving into motes of light that drifted upward and vanished into the ceiling. The chair beneath him returned to simple stone. The pulse quieted, returning to its calm, patient beat. Gleam floated beside him, radiant once more. "You made the heart smile," they whispered. Percival rubbed his eyes. "Good." It looked like it needed cheering up. He stood, and together they began the slow ascent toward a faint tunnel that spiraled upward from the chamber's edge, a passage carved by laughter, not erosion. Behind them, the pulse continued, steady and serene, as though keeping time for all the nonsense yet to come.